Today we examine the concept of attitude. Is it more than just our feelings about something? Is there any way we can measure our attitudes? I mean, surely we can't stick a thermometer in the head and get a reading on attitudes the same way we can stick a thermometer in the mouth and get a reading on temperature. Can we use it to predict behavior in the workplace? Is a worker with positive job attitudes, with good feelings of satisfaction, somebody who's going to be a productive worker? Or could it be that somebody who's feeling good about their level of productivity turns out to be a satisfied worker? A kind of difficult, complex concept, and that's what we tackle today. Let's first try to define this elusive thing called an attitude, something we use all the time. We talk about people who say, "I don't like your attitude," or "This person has a wonderful attitude towards a situation." What are we really talking about? And in terms of behavioral science, are we using the word the same way? Well, if we go to the PowerPoint, we can see from a behavioral science perspective, we think of an attitude as a stable cluster of feelings, of beliefs, and of behavioral intentions toward people, toward things, or toward events. So it's more than just feelings. Let's explore this a little bit further as I talk to some of you about your attitudes towards work. If I come back here and ask Diane, can you tell me what kind of work do you do?
I do a lot of planning. We plan to go away, take trips.
Like a travel consultant of some sort?
In the military.
Okay. We're missing the mic unless you talk. Okay. What aspects of the job do you find interesting and challenging?
Actually, the whole job. The planning, working with people. We work with such a diverse group. Just planning on getting all the equipment and people to where they're supposed to be. It's a challenge.
Okay. Are there times when you hit frustrating situations?
Yes, we do.
Okay. What kinds of things lead to frustration?
Not having the right equipment at the right place for the people that need it. You know, whether it's parts of the airplanes, for replacements.
Okay. Do you think that there's a chance of moving upward in this? Do you see opportunities for advancing?
Oh, yes, definitely. Plenty of opportunities where I work at.
Okay. And what would you change about it if you could change things?
I guess, since it's a government agency, the bureaucratic system, all the paperwork that needs to be completed to get anything changed.
Okay, so that the job can simultaneously be fascinating and frustrating.
Yes.
All at once. See, attitude's complex, sometimes positive, sometimes can run negative, depending on a situation. Let me move and talk to some others. Larry, can you tell us what kind of job you have or have had?
Well, right now I'm working security at the department store.
Okay, and do you find the work interesting?
At times, sometimes it's good, interesting, but other times it's pretty boring.
What makes it interesting when it's interesting?
Situations are going on, depending like we're a shoplifter, and we get to see the cameras and.
Okay, and when it gets boring, what's going on?
Just standing around looking around.
If you were to be in that job full time, would you see a chance for advancing in it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if you could change something about the job, are there ways you could think of changing it?
It's a lot of he says, she says. A lot of manipulation, I think, going on there.
Okay, so that sometimes coworkers, would you say, contribute to some frustrating situations at work, and you'd like to change that. Pat, what kind of work are you doing?
I work full-time as an administrative assistant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what aspects of your job do you find interesting and fascinating?
I love my job. I find everything about it fascinating and interesting. I love the fast pace. the dealing with the public and all the opportunities for learning that I've received from working there.
Do you find it sometimes frustrating? Are there times when you hit moments in the job and...
The only time really that I find it frustrating is when I don't quite have enough hands and there's a little more work at the moment than I can do myself.
Okay, so either the pace of work can be episodic, sometimes fast-paced and...
Sometimes, but I love it.
Yeah. Would you see opportunities for advancement?
I do see opportunities for advancement, yes.
Okay, and are there things, if you could change about the job, you would change?
The only thing I would change is the rate of pay.
Even it out a little bit, maybe. Yeah, okay. Well, we talked mostly, as you can see, about the job itself, and people brought feelings, clearly, about the job. They either love the job or there are times when, well, it wasn't quite so favorable. But there was a component of beliefs in there as well, where they talked about the tasks themselves that were interesting. Okay, there's another component that I didn't ask people directly, because I didn't want to put anybody on the spot. And the behavioral intention that we often look at from looking at job attitudes is, would you stay with this place? And is there some relationship, and we're going to look at that a little bit more, in terms of how you feel about your job and would you stay with the place. We're going to see if there's some kind of connection there. But in general, we want to start to dissect this thing of attitudes into its three components. Beliefs, which I like to think of as cool thoughts. Feelings, hot emotions. There's clearly a heated aspect to that, I believe. And behavioral intentions, a tendency to respond in a way that presumably is consistent with the thoughts and the feelings. We expect that people who feel positively about something, who have beliefs about something that they evaluate in a positive direction, should act consistently. You know, we're going to also take a look at how much does that happen. Let's first take a look at the cool thoughts that you have that feed into this whole thing that we call an attitude. Let's start with maybe an attitude that somebody has towards the environment and how industry plays a role in protecting or polluting the environment. The belief component that you might have if you are very pro-environmentalism is that industry will take every advantage not to clean up after itself. That would be a belief. Okay? There's no evaluation in that. Somebody asks you, you know, if we don't regulate industry, what do you think they're going to do? And you're going to say, well, you know, my belief is they're going to dump. Belief part of it. If we go to the feeling side of it, and we're talking about an emotional response. It's a gut feeling that you have towards something. And usually you can put it into one of two classifications. I like, I don't like. It's good, it's bad. So two general areas that you can do with feelings. Pollution, bad. Okay? Emotional response to it. And when you hear about companies that are dumping and polluting, you get a little emotionally charged over that. It gets you a little angry. Okay, that's what I talk about is the hot emotional response. Well, if we, again working with this, we've got two components to it. You think that industry will take every advantage, belief, polluting is bad. Where does this take you to in terms of a behavioral intention? Well, you should be, depending on how central this is, how important it is to you, supporting candidates who politically are willing to vote for regulation of industries. That's a simple part. If it's more central to you, you're going to take it a step further and you're going to become, or maybe give some money to some of the funds. And there are a number, Sierra Club, some environmental defense funds as a possibility. Okay, and third thing, if it's really central to you, you're going to be one of those people who's out collecting endorsements, money, or something like that. Depends how important it is, but you can see certain steps that it should go in this direction if it's important to you. That's example one. Second example that I want to consider, which is an attitude that's floating around in politics right now, and that is attitudes towards foreign products. Suppose you hold a belief: Japanese cars are more reliable than US cars. Okay, belief. Feeling part. Well, reliable cars are good. Where should that take you? It should take you towards buying Japanese cars and shunning or not even considering US cars. We're going to also take a look at, does it work out that way? Sometimes, sometimes not. We're going to examine this in just a minute. One of the great puzzles of the world, as we look at these three pieces and we begin to see sometimes where inconsistencies fall into place. Do you believe that cigarette smoking causes cancer? Well, the packages are all labeled out there now that it's dangerous to your health, and if not cancer, some other cardiovascular illness or a respiratory illness, one of those things. And many, many, many people believe that. Not everybody. There's some people who don't. Okay. We probably all agree cancer is bad. I haven't seen any positive value to cancer yet. Third thing, if you have those two pieces in place, the belief that there is a link between smoking and cancer, okay, the judgmental feeling part of it, cancer is bad, then presumably you shouldn't be smoking. And we can get people, interestingly, who hold both of those and still smoke. What is this massive inconsistency that's going on? Why does that happen? And again, we'll take that apart and we'll look at that in just a minute. It's kind of a puzzle. People don't always behave in the most rational, presumably, of ways. The consistency that we expect to be there isn't always there. Last thing, can't resist bringing this up because it is the political season. And New Jersey, it's something that the newspapers are tackling. Is there a link between lowering state income taxes and the rise in local property taxes? Some people believe there's a link. Well, if you believe there's a link, okay, and your feeling is high property taxes are bad, okay, then where it should lead you in terms of voting is to vote for somebody who's going to presumably say, well, I'm not going to do anything to that state income tax. Is that where it gets us as we look at these different components of beliefs, feelings, and intentions to behave? Okay, a few things I want to point out as we looked at these various examples. The inconsistency that sometimes creeps in. Why does it creep in? Well, in part, it depends on how central, how important the attitude is towards you, and how salient, how recently have you thought about the issue. So the issue about paying taxes and local property taxes and its relationship to state income taxes may be something that is of concern to you but not major concern except for the time you have to write out that check to your local government. If we go back to the first issue that I talked about, how central is it? Attitudes towards the environment. Most of us might say, yeah, we want clean air, we want clean water. You know, we kind of support regulation. I don't know how much we want extra taxes on it. But suppose you happen to live near an industrial plant that's spewing stuff up into the air, or you happen to live near an old industrial site that was a toxic waste dump. All of a sudden, for you, that's going to be a very central attitude because that's going to impinge on the quality of your life. It's central and it's salient. So these things are going to matter in terms of trying to predict behavior. Yeah, I like clean water. I like clean air. I'll support politicians who are in favor of reasonable regulation. Okay, if regulation goes beyond common sense and people are going to start losing jobs on account of it, then I'm going to put that in the balance as well, because now we're weighing different kinds of things. I'm probably not going to be out there soliciting signatures or collecting money, okay? So you talk about centrality of these kinds of things. How much is it going to predict of my behavior? Okay, you have to know the strength of my attitude on the issue. So centrality and saliency as being two important kinds of things. The other one that I mentioned in terms of inconsistency, what about these people who smoke and believe that smoking is bad? It's almost hard to deny the link in that it causes cancer. Why the heck are they still smoking? What accounts for this? Well, the loopholes that we're able to negotiate in terms of these arguments. Not everybody gets cancer who smokes. And now you can begin to see yourself as, well, maybe I'm going to be one of those who's going to beat the odds. It's not going to happen to me. It's also not going to happen immediately. So, well, I can worry about that later, okay? Or I'll smoke for a little while now, and then I'll cut back on it. So we are constantly engaged in doing things that we know are kind of bad for us. And we know we shouldn't do things that are bad for us, and yet we do them. We're going to look at this anyway. How is it that we go about measuring an attitude? There are about 4 different ways. Well, we'll look at some direct ways and some indirect ways of measuring. Attitude scales are typically what's used, and I distributed to you some samples of attitude scales that are particularly used for measuring job attitudes. The first is something called a Likert scale. And the Likert scale assesses the beliefs, the feelings, and tendencies that we have by checking off a number that presumably measures your attitude. Okay, if I can get something on the overhead, I'm going to try to also get a sample of this up. Okay. If we look at the first question there from one of the scales that's out there in the public domain, we begin to see a unidimensional. There are other scales that I'm going to show you where attitudes are measured towards work are measured under several dimensions. But this one is more or less unidimensional, just getting at overall beliefs, feelings about the job. It's not going to measure tendency to remain on the job. And so my job is like a hobby to me. And points would be assigned to each of these. Typically it's a 5-point scale, with the strongly agree, most positive, usually getting assigned a number of 5, and strongly disagree a number of 1. And sometimes the positive side is on the left, and sometimes the positive side is on the right, because sometimes things are worded positively and sometimes things are worded negatively. That's just so You don't get in a set of always checking things off on the right-hand side of the scale or the left-hand side of the scale. And we get to see some general statements that measure attitudes towards work. This is a typical Likert scale. Okay, a positive, a negative one would be, I'm often bored with my work, as opposed to a positive one over here, I feel that my job is, well, no more interesting than others I could get, or I like my job better than the average worker does. Okay, so a typical Likert type scale. A second type of scale is called the semantic differential scale. And on this type of scale, I hope this picks up. Can we try this? Okay. Okay, on the semantic differential scale, some kind of concept is evaluated by using opposing adjectives. In this piece of research that I carried out with a colleague several years ago at some local hospitals, we were looking at attitudes that nurses had towards patients, and we were looking at varying patients of different ages. So if you flip into the inside page, there's a little paragraph there which describes a patient who's either male in some cases, well, you don't have this, I'm sorry, or female, and those descriptors varied by the questionnaire, and was either 60 years of age or 30 years of age. And then we asked them, having read that as a central concept in mind, here's the patient, okay, here are some adjectives, and check the number 1 through 7 that comes closest to how you would describe this person. And again, using these various adjectives, and you have to come up with adjectives that relate to the situation, again, you can assess something about beliefs. Here we can talk about beliefs towards male or female. Are they more likely to be seen as powerful or weak, as considerate or callous? And we can get feelings about this as well. Emerges from it. Are they more likely to be checking on the positive or the negative side of the scale? That overall gives you a sense of feeling. So another way of measuring attitudes, the semantic differential scale. A third way of measuring attitudes, these are some of the newer ways that are being used particularly in advertising areas, are using physiological measures. Can we capture something of an attitude from our behavioral responses? And now we're looking at behavioral indicators. Do we flash certain facial reactions so fast when we're talking about certain things that we're not even cognizant ourselves, but if people were videotaping us, they could pick it up? Somebody mentions a product and you go, sort of screw your face up in disgust, or you smile as a possibility. But these are happening so fast that you wouldn't know it. And can we use these as an indicator of attitude? And the other thing that is being investigated as an indicator of attitude, physiological, is pupil dilation. Presumably when we get excited about something, our eyes dilate. Pupils dilate. You need special instruments for this. And this is, again, if you're on the marketing research side of things, this would be interesting because can you capture somebody's attention with a certain type of packaging? Which is what companies are trying to do all the time. Cute packaging gets somebody's attention. And we use this as a physiological indicator. So that's being examined. And then there are a host of things that we call unobtrusive measures, rather than asking people directly, because maybe they won't directly tell us their attitudes towards certain things. Is there some way we can measure indirectly and get around it? Well, As an example of this, a study towards racial attitudes was done several years ago. Very clever study, indirectly assessing. Because if you ask people directly how they feel about people of other races, very often they're going to give you a socially desirable response. Fine, upstanding. But this may not be a true measure of attitudes. In this piece of research, they had students who had accents clearly identified with different races. And they had them call up numbers. They're sort of numbers chosen at random. And they said, listen, I thought I was reaching a garage. My car broke down. I really need some help. I don't have any dimes left. Nickels, quarters, well, years ago it was a dime. Okay, now it's a quarter. I just don't have money left to pay. Would you please call this number, which is the garage, and tell them my car broke down and I need help? Well, the number they gave was not a garage. It was the researcher's number, and they just wanted to see what was the percentage of callbacks by varying racial accents. An unobtrusive way of indirectly measuring attitudes. Now, it's true that there could be other things involved in it besides just attitudes, but it was an indirect way of getting around at these kinds of issues. Other unobtrusive measures that are used in terms of trying to figure out attitudes. In a similar vein, people were trying to measure attitudes towards the legalization of marijuana. Again, a socially hot topic. Very socially hot. We just saw that somebody who was nominated to be ambassador to Mexico because of some attitudes that he held towards the use of marijuana for medical purposes was not even given a hearing. So it's still a hot topic. In this case, letters were left around various places of a campus towards an organization that supports legalization of marijuana. Okay, and they just looked by different areas where they were left, where they mailed. They were mailed to a box office. Again, it was the researcher's box office. And they were just trying to say, well, if we leave them, in faculty places, student places, libraries, locker rooms, can we pick up any different attitudes just by location? They were just doing things like that. So another indirect way of measuring things. Other things can feed into it, that's for sure. And we could dissect that, but trying to get some unobtrusive way of doing it. Finally, another type of unobtrusive measure that they use in art museums to try to figure out what are the popular places. Instead of asking people, they look at the patterns of wear on the carpet. An unobtrusive, indirect measure towards getting feelings towards how people see certain situations. Well, our attitudes do not come to us from the blue. We develop our attitudes. How is it we come to develop our attitudes? Basically 3 ways. From information, from learning, and from a subcategory of learning called modeling. Information. Where does the information come from? Well, it comes from things that we initially hear from our parents when they tell us what's good and what's bad. And then information that we get from friends and schools where they tell us much of the same thing. And then our world broadens and we get information from the media. Television hammers us constantly. As a matter of fact, television gets to young children too. It's called cartoons. Cartoons and the advertising that goes along with cartoons. Because if you watch children in the supermarket with parents, you'll see to what extent they determine what products are purchased. Interesting little experience that you might undertake. So learning from media, from TV, from movies, from newspapers. We try to create impressions. one way or the other, through advertising and through the content of programs themselves and what they're willing to tackle on programs. And so you can see over the years, things have changed in television. Okay, if you go back to looking to, I don't know, I Love Lucy, you can always look at the reruns. You'll see that Lucy and Ricky had twin beds. Okay, we now see things very differently these days on television. Television is much more open, and the question is, are they reflecting values, or are they guiding values and shaping values and attitudes? Works both ways, probably. So information. Learning. There's a song from a show called South Pacific called You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. And it's about learning about bias, prejudice, and stereotyping. And in much the same way that we learn other things, we're rewarded for certain attitudes that we hold, the same way we are rewarded for other behaviors that we engage in. We're rewarded by our parents. We're rewarded by our friends. And sometimes if we don't hold the same attitude as our friends, there's certain negative sanctions that we are going to be feeling from them. So there's a lot of reinforcement out there for holding various types of attitudes. A straightforward learning process. Sometimes learning by association. A couple of things go together. Attitudes towards people that we meet. And if our initial associations are positive, then we're going to generalize, and we're really good as humans in generalizing. Okay? And if our associations are negative, then we're going to make generalizations that are negative, and these go to our attitudes, not only to specific ways that we're willing to engage in interacting with people. So learning. And finally, modeling. I said modeling is really a subcategory of learning. It's not learning by direct experience. It's learning by watching other people. Do we learn by watching other people? Well, every company that's ever paid for an endorsement is betting we sure do. What's the point of endorsements out there? Look at all the sports figures and the mega bucks that they earn for endorsements. What's the point? Well, somehow, if this person endorses a product, doesn't even necessarily have to be in an area where the person is an expert. If they endorse the product, and we want to be like the person, then we're going to use the product. So, you know, go through that rampant sports endorsements and look at the numbers of people who are actors or actresses who do commercials. Not only is there good pay for commercials, but there is the belief on the part of people paying for this that somehow it's going to shape a positive attitude towards the person who will be buying the product. So we're learning attitudes much the same way that we learn other things. Is there a payoff for this? Can we predict that people are going to buy products if they have positive attitudes towards them? Can we predict that people are going to vote for candidates if they have positive attitudes towards them? Are we going to always act in accordance with our attitudes? Well, we've already answered some of this before by saying no, not always. What are the things that lead to better prediction? First is consistency between thoughts and beliefs. Okay, sometimes thoughts and beliefs are not always consistent with each other. You think, how can that be? Well, I can believe eating a lot of chocolate is bad for me. Okay, I can still eat a lot of chocolate. So we get some inconsistency there. My feelings towards chocolate are, no matter how much I think that it could lead towards things that aren't good for me. It could lead towards cavities. It could make me hyperactive. I still love chocolate. I mean, there's no way anyone will convince me that chocolate doesn't taste good. My direct experience tells me that. A second thing is subjective norms. Do we believe that other people will think positively of us by behaving in a certain way, even if it's discrepant with our attitudes? Here's the teenager's dilemma. Many teenagers know that certain behaviors are dangerous. So why do they behave in these crazy behaviors? It's the norms. They believe that by engaging in behaviors, even if they're dangerous for them, people are going to think more highly of them. Subjective norms get in the way, the norms that we hold about various situations. Or we could feel public pressure so that maybe I don't really believe that all the goals of some environmental fund are really positive. And normally if they asked me one-on-one, I wouldn't sign the petition. But now I'm in a group with a lot of people and everybody's signing the petition. It could be public pressure. I just don't want to stand out from everybody else. And so now I'm behaving again in ways that are discrepant with what I really believe. Norms interfere. People's understanding of what norms are cuts into the link between attitudes and behavior. Direct experience. Those attitudes that we pick up from direct experience are going to be attitudes which are going to be more powerful for us than those that we pick up from observing other people. Experience can be a very powerful teacher, and we'll expect more consistency there than in other situations. And finally, attitude accessibility. At the time that we're engaging in the behavior, how salient is the attitude? Is it important to us? How central is it? Are we thinking about it? Sometimes, at the time that we're engaging in the discrepant behavior, it's not a particularly important thing for us at that moment. And so we let it ride. Okay? There may be times, if we go back to the work situation, where something happened at work and we really feel very angry about the work situation. Somebody asked you right then and there, how do you feel about work? You might say, I hate it. Okay? And yet, 3 days later, somebody asks you, you want to stay with this job? Is this a good job? And they say, this job is the best job in the world. So at that moment, people are asking you about your job. You're not even thinking about those moments of anger that you had 3 days earlier. That wasn't even accessible to you at that point. Okay, so the link is not as good as we wish it were, yet if we measure carefully, we can get a good relationship. And now, two particular job attitudes, work-related attitudes that we want to talk about. One is job satisfaction, and the other is organizational commitment. Job satisfaction, because one, historically it has been studied, probably since about early 1930s on, with the belief either that job satisfaction had some payoff in the workplace for management, or management was somewhat benevolent and just believed that it was important in and of its own to have satisfied workers. So we've studied it and studied it and studied it. You'd think we'd know something about it at this point, and we do know a bit about it. First of all, what does it consist of? It's a job attitude, and so it consists of beliefs that we have about the workplace. It consists of feelings or evaluations towards those beliefs, okay? And again, about the job, and sometimes beyond the job itself to wider things. Because our attitudes towards the job are not influenced only by the job itself. It's more complex. Sometimes our attitudes towards the job are influenced by the amount of pay that we're getting. Sometimes they're influenced by the supervision that we're getting. Sometimes they're influenced by overall organizational policies, and sometimes by coworkers. And you will notice in one of the questionnaires that I handed out in that packet of questionnaires, there is in fact a well-known measure called the Job Description Index that measures each of these aspects. Measures aspects of work, and there are descriptors about work, of supervision, of coworker, of pay, and of promotions. How does this all work? This notion of satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Well, one of the well-known theories was one put forth by Frederick Herzberg, in which he really looked at satisfaction as consisting of two separate dimensions. Not one, I'm satisfied or I'm dissatisfied, but two dimensions, a dimension relating to satisfaction going from neutral to satisfied, and a dimension of dissatisfaction going from neutral to dissatisfied. Two distinctly separate areas. And so you could feel satisfied about some parts of your work and simultaneously dissatisfied. The satisfied aspects of work are things that he ultimately called motivators and consist of factors such as personal growth or advancement, of recognition, of responsibility, of promotion opportunities, and of feelings of achievement. And Herzberg holds that if we're getting these things out of a job, if we feel positive on these dimensions, or some of these dimensions, we're going to feel satisfied about the work. And notice that these are pretty much internal to the work itself. Okay? Most of them relate to stuff that we can get out of the work itself. They're not external factors. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. On the downside of things, we have what he came to call the hygiene factors. Things related to supervision, what type of boss do we have, to pay, to company policies, to working conditions, the physical conditions in which we work. Is it too hot? Is it noisy, for example? Is it cramped? To our coworkers, and to job security. All of these things are pretty much external factors. They do not directly relate to the tasks that we're doing. And if we're dissatisfied on these factors, we're going to feel pretty dissatisfied about work. If we're satisfied about these, if we have a great office, we like our boss, our coworkers are fine, we're not going to feel dissatisfied, but we may not feel particularly satisfied unless we rate high on those previous dimensions that I talked about. So, hygiene factors external, motivating factors internal. And how did he come by all of this? The research that he carried out over the years, and there's still controversy as to whether this theory holds in the workplace, was done working with professional people, accountants and engineers, using a technique that's called the critical incident technique, where he asked people to keep logs or diaries about times when they felt good about their work and when they felt bad about their work. Turns out the times that these people felt good about their work were times when they were experiencing achievement, when they found the work very challenging, they were getting more responsibility. Okay, these were the good times. The times that they felt bad about their work, bad working conditions, times when there were run-ins with coworkers or bosses, external kinds of things. Is this reminiscent of anything that we talked about previously? Think back 2 or 3 sessions ago, and we talked about attribution theory. It comes back again. okay, in terms of the attributions that we take for ourselves for success and failure. And so maybe what we're looking at here is really an artifact or a byproduct of attribution theory or some self-serving bias that's going on. When things are going good, we have a tendency to take credit ourselves, internal factors. When things are going poorly, we tend to look for excuses out there, external factors. But his work proved to be important nonetheless, and we're going to pick up on it in just a couple of sessions when we talk about motivation, job motivation and job design. It really turned out to be the underpinnings of a lot of the interesting work that went on in how to redesign jobs to help engage worker motivation. So what then leads to job satisfaction, and what are some of the consequences that we can expect from it? In terms of consequences, withdrawal behaviors have shown to relate more positively and consistently than anything else. And what are we talking about with withdrawal behaviors? For people who are feeling more satisfied, they're more likely to turn up for work and give you more of an honest day's work, and less likely to leave the job place voluntarily. Leave involuntary turnover out of this. So they're more likely to engage in the job. People who are dissatisfied, just the reverse. They have greater absenteeism, and along with that, tardiness. They're more likely to engage in this term that has been called time theft. What is time theft? Well, you find ways of when you're on the job of not doing your work. More talking, longer lunch hours, longer breaks, finding ways to leave early, those kinds of things. More time on the phone with people, if you can get away with that, and more time futzing around on your computer, doing things that are not directly job related. What about the issue of productivity? Does that relate in any way at all to job satisfaction? For years, the expression a happy worker is a productive worker was tossed around. But we find that tain't so. At best, it's a very, very, very small relationship, so small as to be insignificant. Why not? Why aren't people who are satisfied more productive on the workplace? And why is it that people who are dissatisfied can be very productive workers? Well, other things contribute to it. In some instances, the job may be so structured that there is little room for discretion in terms of how productive you can be. That's part of it. We're going to go to another job attitude that may fit into it as well. It's called organizational commitment. Some people are just committed to getting the work done regardless of how they feel about the job. That's just their personality. There are other people who are going to find aspects of the workplace extremely satisfying, but they're not good workers. Love the workplace, get great pay, love my boss, love the supervision. Okay, but they're just not great workers. They love their coworkers. What are they going to spend their time doing? Spending a lot of time chatting with their coworkers. Okay, so the relationship just doesn't necessarily hold up. As a matter of fact, people have looked at the relationship in reverse and said, is there some relationship between productivity and being satisfied? Are those people who are experiencing really good times on the job, experiencing success, also ultimately experiencing some feelings of job satisfaction? And one of the areas where they've investigated this in particular is they've looked at sports teams. And teams that are achieving are teams where workers generally tend to be, or players tend to be more satisfied, better feelings of cohesiveness about the job. So that link is not necessarily, the link between productivity and attitude is one that, let's just say, is not a strong link. And don't necessarily expect that to be an outcome of job satisfaction. You want to raise job satisfaction in the workplace? Sure, raise it. Raise it to lower turnover, raise it to lower absenteeism. Don't expect worker productivity to go up with it. There are other things that will contribute to worker productivity. And we will look at those as we examine motivation. What influences job satisfaction? How are we going to get it in workers if we have trouble in the workplace? One of the things that we can look at is quality supervision. Bosses contribute a fair amount to how people feel about their jobs. They can make workers feel very good about jobs, and they can make workers feel this high and walk away from a job feeling really diminished and demeaned. So quality supervision is important. Fair pay, where workers feel that pay is somehow not being administered fairly, and you don't know how pay raises are coming, but you suspect it has nothing to do with the amount of work that you're doing, then chances are you're not going to feel very good about your job. And so people want fair pay. They want fair treatment in general. That's important to workers, the perception of equity and fairness on the job. Empowerment, asking people to participate, particularly in decisions that impinge on them. Give them a chance to speak out. That also goes into feeling as if you're being treated fairly. And also as if you have something intelligent to say about the situation. You're the one who has direct experience. They're going to change the way you're doing a job. Why aren't they asking you? You know what's right and what's wrong with the situation. And finally, at that point of selection, let's make sure that we have a person who fits well with the job. If the job requires a lot of travel on weekends, and this is a person who hates travel on weekends, don't hire that person for that job, or who can't travel, or who doesn't even like travel. If the job requires working other than a regular shift, be careful who you select for that job. Not everybody can be perky at 10 o'clock at night. Okay, so good fits there. And the last concept that I want to explore with you is that of organizational commitment. Organizational commitment is the extent to which an individual identifies with an organization, is involved with the organization, and is unwilling to leave the organization. Need to fill in a few things there. This person wants to stay with the organization. One of the most popular scales for measuring it is a scale that was put together by Mowdy, Steers, and Porter. Let me just increase this, see if we can get, okay, this is also part of the handouts. Okay, and you can see how these questions, I'll read some of them off, tap the very aspects that I mentioned. I'm willing to put in a great deal of effort beyond what is normally expected to help the organization be successful. Involvement with the organization. Identifying with the organization. I talk up this organization to my friends as a great organization to work for. There's a sense of identification with the organization. And unwilling to leave the organization. Okay. Well, in a negative way, in reverse, it would take very little change in my present circumstances to cause me to leave this organization. If you disagree strongly with that, then you're going to feel as if you really want to stick with the organization. So these three components turn out to be the basis for organizational commitment. it basically comes down to two aspects. One is what we call value commitment. I feel as if this organization has the same values that I hold, and therefore I'm going to be willing to work for this organization a great deal and help out this organization. And the other is called continuance commitment. I put so much time in here that to leave this organization now would mean that I'd lose in terms of my pension, profit sharing plans that I have in this, and so it could be actual money, or where I am in the career, I'd have to slide back somewhere along my career line. And so you stay with the organization, at least you pick up on that aspect, the continuance commitment. I'm not willing to leave this organization. It would take an enormous amount to get me out of here, because you have so much personally invested in the organization. Two aspects to commitment. Well, where does commitment take us? Okay, this notion of organizational commitment. The notion of continuance, people who have strong levels of organizational commitment just aren't going to leave. They're staying with it. A willingness to make shared sacrifices. Years and years ago, when Delta Airlines was much smaller than it is now, there was a time when the organization went through some hard times and they had to shelve buying an airplane. Workers took up collections to help the organization, Delta, buy an airplane. So we're not talking small bucks. Shared sacrifices. I'm willing to do an awful lot to make this organization succeed. I will work nights. I will work weekends. I'll put in extra effort because I really care about this place and what it's doing. And I'm going to pitch in and help it work. And finally, a sense of something that's called organizational citizenship. I'll help other people in this organization. I'll go out of my way to see that they have the information and resources that they need. So how do you get organizational commitment? How does it come about? Well, it's easier to have commitment to organizations that are doing the right thing. They make products that don't fall apart. There's a sense of social responsibility in the organization. They're not mean to people. They don't pollute. You know, it's a good organization to work for. Also, jobs that are enriched, that call on your intellect in order to perform the job. Participatory management, again, going to the people, engaging workers. The more you engage workers, the more committed they become in the workplace. Aligning workers' interests with the company, profit sharing. Company succeeds, I succeed. And demonstrating trust. Okay, the need to get around that old problem of the trust gap. This is what leads to organizational commitment. So, we've gone from looking at components of attitudes to some specific job attitudes and how they play out in the workplace. Next time, we pick up with learning in the workplace and the important role that it plays, both formally and informally.